Hi, my name is John. I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober since May 16th, 2005. Is that good?
That's good.
Give me. I have a sponsor, and I have a home group, which is the Midtown group of Alcoholics Anonymous. We meet in Bethesda, Maryland, on Sunday nights at 7:30 p.m. at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. And if you're ever up in the area, Heidi can give you my number, or you can get it tonight, and I'd love to show you my home group. Thank you, Heidi, for asking me to come down here. I'm going to be honest. When Heidi asked me, I hesitated for a second. I was like, okay. And so last week, as most of you probably know, we had a large snowstorm. I think you guys got maybe a little bit of it down here as well. So we got a lot up there. I think outside of my door, we got about 27 inches of snow. And that's a lot for us. You know, we're not used to that. So it's not like we're Boston or one of these, places that get snow like that. And so I called Heidi up and I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. And so I thought that was it. I thought that was it. And then Heidi said, well, because what I said was, Heidi, I don't think I can make it. I'll come another weekend. Just let me know. And she said, my commitment ends next week. And I have somebody for next week. And I was like, man. I was like, all right. And I thought I was off the hook. But she texted me, I think on Tuesday, and she said, my speaker can't make it. Can you come down next weekend? And I'll tell you, I hesitated for a second, but the truth is that everything in my life that's good is a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything. And this is nothing to come down here. I would do it again and again and again because AA has saved my life. And if you're new tonight or if this is your first meeting, welcome. I know that when I got to AA, I really wasn't sure what was going on here, but I knew I saw hope in people's eyes. I knew the message that I heard was I related to people, but I wasn't, I hadn't, basically I knew that there was something there. And so I stuck around. And I hope if you're new, you stick around. I hope you stay. I hope you get a sponsor. And I hope you give this thing a shot. Because when I got here, I had no idea what my life would be like because of Alcoholics Anonymous. But today I can tell you that I would gladly travel to North Carolina from Maryland to come here and be with you all. So thank you, Heidi. I did want to tell a quick story about Heidi, though, since she's got me all the way down here. Heidi got sober in the same home group I was in. Heidi got sober. We have a conference up there, and I do parking, and I help people park their cars. And I'm standing there doing parking, and this girl, Heidi, who at the time, I swear she was 15 years old. She said she was 16, I think. She said she just turned 16. Comes running over to me, and she's got on like this little top. I don't know what she comes running over. She's like, hi, I'm Heidi. What's your name? Do you have a girlfriend? And I'm like 29 years old, and I'm like, I'm standing there. I'm like, oh my God, and I can't move. I'm directing these cars, and she's like, oh my God, you look like so and so, and you this, and so Heidi has come a very long way. And honestly, I respect Heidi. I love Heidi a lot, and I respect her program. And it's amazing what AA can do to people, because you were a child when you came here, literally, figuratively, and literally a child, and now you've grown into a wonderful woman who I've seen practice these principles and live this way of life. And I'm so glad that you found a home down here and you found people who are doing the same thing. So thank you. And I also wanted to thank Jerry. Jerry's my sponsor. And so coming down here is always great because I get to spend some time with Jerry. And I know Heidi knew that when she asked me to come down here as well. And Jerry took time out of his day today to hang out with me. And we got some lunch together and we hung out. And so I'm always grateful for time I get to spend with Jerry, and I'm grateful that you have taken me on this path with you and showed me a way to God. So thank you. And I'm going to tell you guys in a general way what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. I grew up in Maryland, in Montgomery County, Maryland, in a little area called Aspen Hill, Maryland, and I can remember You know, a lot of people say they felt different when they were younger, and I'll tell you what I remember. I remember that I was always very competitive. I always wanted to be the best at whatever I did. If I was playing a sport, I had to be the best. If I was, when I was in school, before I left school, I always wanted to be the best. If we were hanging out somewhere, I wanted you to know that I was the coolest person there. If there was a girl, I wanted to make sure that I got her and not one of my friends, you know. I wanted to be the best kid to my parents, you know. Whatever it was, I always had this inner competition going on with myself and with everybody around me. And I can remember that from when I was in elementary school. And I say that to tell you that if I look at my life and look at where I started to go off on a different path, it was based on that competition. And what that competition was I wanted to be cool. You know, I had to be cool. I don't know why some people... cool to some people is good grades and academics and extracurricular activities in school. Cool for me was, you're not going to mess with me, because if you do, you're going to get your butt whooped. You know, and that's the cool that I saw. And so at some point in middle school, I switched from being that kid who thought getting good grades was the right thing to do, to being that kid who thought skipping school and hanging out with the guys who were smoking weed and you know, pushing kids into their lockers was what was cool. I got into high school and very quickly surrounded myself with people who were partying, people who were smoking cigarettes. I remember specifically leaving school with guys who were seniors and who could drive, you know, when I was a freshman, and just hanging out. And what ended up happening to me was when I was 16 years old, I decided to drop out of high school. And at that point, I hadn't even really started drinking yet, but I was getting high and doing a lot of other stuff. And I dropped out of high school, and my house that I grew up in actually burned down. And it burned down from a fire that started from me and my friends hanging out in our basement. And that put me further away from school, and I got a license right when I turned 16. And what I did was basically I'd go to school in the morning, I'd meet up with some people who also weren't going to school anymore, and we'd go get messed up, you know. And the story of my first drunk, I like to tell it because it involves my mom's boyfriend, and he was an interesting character. We in this new house that we had moved into while our old other house was being rebuilt, my mom started dating this guy, and we called him Jesus. And we called him Jesus because he looked just like Jesus, except he drove a pickup truck. And it was an old pickup truck, like a 1970s. I don't know if that's too old, but it was like a 1970-something pickup truck, you know. And Jesus was the type of guy who would come home to the house, and we'd go outside in the morning, and his truck would just be messed up. You know, the whole side would be smashed in, the front would be smashed in, and we'd say, Jesus, your truck's messed up. And he'd say, what are you talking about? You know, he had no recollection of his truck getting into a crash. You know, and then like a week later, he'd see a dumpster down the street, you know, and he'd be like, I hit that. There's the paint from my truck on the dumpster, you know. And so Jesus brought home a couple of fifths of vodka one night, and I got drunk for the first time. And I remember it specifically because it was the first time I can remember praying in my life, really. And the prayer was, because I got so sick, the room was spinning, I was laying on the bathroom floor, and I was throwing up. And I remember praying to God, if you make this feeling go away, I'll never do this ever again. And I remember, you know, waking up the next day and blacking out. Some people told me I'd done some stuff that I don't remember doing. And I remember making that promise. And I remember that next afternoon, some friends suggested that we do it again. And I said, that's a great idea. Let's do it again. You know, and that pretty much right there sums up my drinking. My drinking would be a bunch of broken promises, a bunch of prayers, a bunch of pleads for help and for, you know, I'm going to change, I'm going to do it differently. And I never got anywhere. I always would return to drinking. And at this point, like I said, I was 16 years old, and I dropped out of school. I told my mom, who I was living with, I was going to go get a job. And so I applied at the McDonald's across the street. And the McDonald's didn't even call me back, and I was like, Mom, I'm not getting a job, you know. And I proceeded to basically rob and steal for the next couple of years get what I wanted. And my drinking progressed. The type of people I hung out with, I wouldn't say it progressed. It got worse. I would surround myself with other guys and girls who were not going to school, who had the same sort of ideas about what life was supposed to be, which was just getting messed up as often as possible, at whatever means necessary. Whose family are we going to steal from today? Which store are we going to break the window to get into? Whatever it took, I was willing to do it. And at the age of 18, I got arrested for the first time as an adult with my first DWI. And I was, from the time I was 16 to 18, my blackouts and my drinking got progressively worse. And what I mean by that is in the beginning, and I don't know if anybody else relates to this, but blackouts could be kind of funny. They'd be like, do you remember what you did last night? And I was drinking before that everybody had a camera on their phone, so nobody was really filming me. But people would describe my antics. They'd be like, you went and jumped on the mailman's back or something, and so it'd be funny. But then it started to not be so funny. Somebody would say something like, do you remember what you said to that girl last night? Or do you remember hitting that person? Or do you remember driving last night at 100 plus miles an hour down that back road with 3 people in your car? And I didn't. And it wasn't so funny anymore, And by the age of 18, I don't know why, but I like to drink and drive. And people talk about drinking and driving like, I got a DWI. I was at a party and I had too much to drink, and then they tried to, take my keys and I drove home. I was the type of guy who liked to drink while I was driving. I don't know why. It wasn't even necessary. I could have parked it, sat there and drank, but I, for some reason, chose to drive around and drink. I don't know if it was like a continuation of smoking weed and driving around. I don't know what it was, but I just drove and drank. And when I was 18, I ran through a stop sign and pulled into a 7-Eleven and looked to my right, and there was a couple cops right there. And I got out of the car, and they asked me to if I would give them my license, and I proceeded to reach in my pocket to show them my license. And at that point, they asked me to show them my hands. And I was about 9 beers into the 30-pack that was sitting on my seat right there. And I wasn't sure what they wanted me to do. And I got up to them, and they grabbed me. And I reached back, and I just hit the cop right in the face. And, especially nowadays, but hitting a police officer is not a good idea. You know what I mean? It's just not. And what's funny is, up until recently with what a lot of stuff I see in the news, I never would have even thought that it was a bad idea. But these guys are carrying guns. You know what I mean? And I would never hit somebody in the face who had a gun if I didn't have a gun, except when I'm drunk. And I hit this cop, and a bunch more cops came. They messed me up pretty good that night, and I went to jail for the first time as an adult. And I remember it because I remember my family bailed me out, and this would be a repetitive thing that would occur in my life would be John gets in trouble with the law, revolving around something that has to do with his drinking. He ends up in jail, usually gets a vehicle impounded, usually not, well, actually never his vehicle, always one of his parents' vehicles, whether they knew John had it or not. And it would end with a phone call to mommy or daddy or whoever, please help me get out of jail. I don't want to sit here for a month while I have to wait to go to court. And whether the bail was $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000, I would beg somebody to get me out. And they would. And I would go home, and I would promise I was going to change. And I would get a lawyer, and they would say things like, John, you need to go to this 26-week program. It'll get your license back, and it'll help you not go to jail. John, you need to start going to some AA meetings. And that first DWI that I got, I was introduced to AA through the outpatient treatment center that I was in. They suggested that I go to a couple meetings a week, and they gave me a sheet. And one of them was a young person's meeting, and I was at the time 18 years old, and I saw that, so I went to that meeting, and that would begin about a 4.5-year process of me coming in and out of AA and not being able to stay sober, unwilling to do anything other than show up at meetings until my butt wasn't on fire anymore. in which so kindly I was given the name 24-Hour John, actually. In my home group, I have a large home group. There's hundreds of people there. So John is a very common name. There's a lot of Johns in my meeting. So most Johns at some point are given a nickname. And my nickname was 24-Hour John because we have 24-hour chips, the white chips here, up in my meeting. And I picked up so many of them that they just call me 24-Hour John. And still to this day, they call me 24-Hour John. And there's actually nothing more humbling than a new man in the program saying, hey, you're 24-Hour John. And I'm like, you can't call me that. I've tried to give it away a couple of times to some more deserving 24-Hour Johns, but it doesn't work. It'll always be my nickname. There are a couple, actually, who shouldn't take the name, but... So I'm 18 years old. I go to AA. I'm not interested in your solution. 19 years old, I get my second DWI. Again, blackout, drunk, driving on the highway, 85 miles an hour, weaving in and out of traffic, getting pulled over. I'm 20 years old. I get my third DWI. And this DWI, it's literally like the same story over and over again. After the second one, I made a decision I was going to stop again. But I was not interested in this program that you had here. I was just interested in going to some meetings. I was just interested in getting out of trouble. I was interested in meeting a girl, trying to find that girl who could relate to me, We were going to make a sober life together, and we'd always end up getting drunk together, and leaving AA together. And they would always say, John, you need to stay away from women after you get sober. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so I'm 20 years old, and I get my third DWI, and again, my family bails me out, And by the time I was 20, I'd sort of settled into a little bit of a rhythm with my drinking, I would say. I had pushed everybody who meant anything to me or who loved me out of my life. My family couldn't trust me. My mother and father told me they would stay up nights wondering if I was dead or alive. My friends I had pushed away because of my blacking out, because of the way I treated people. A, most of them didn't want to be around me, and B, I was embarrassed to be around a lot of them. So I became a loner. I drank a lot by myself. I ended up not being able to really go to many bars because I would honestly get kicked out a lot of the time the first time I went there. So I would drink in my house by myself. And I would say, my excuse was it's cheaper. It's cheaper. I can buy a $10 half gallon. That'll last me a couple days. I'll get some beers and I'll be okay. And so my drinking relationships consisted of my father at this point, who loved me so much he didn't know what else to do other than to let me live in his house and watch me drink myself to death. And some unlucky girl who for some reason wanted to be my girlfriend and would spend a lot of time with me and watch me kill myself. And I would abuse them verbally, mentally, physically, you name it. I was not a good guy, but they stayed. I was working I would say, a dead-end job, labor job. Every Friday I'd get paid. I'd go to the check cashing store. I'd cash my check. I'd go to the beer store. I knew then I had Friday night, Saturday, Sunday to drink around the clock until I had to be back at work on Monday. And by Monday morning, I'd have no money left. I'd have just enough money to maybe buy some cigarettes for the week, maybe a sub, which I wouldn't be able to get down until about Monday afternoon. And that was it, and to buy beer and drinks for the week. I lived rent-free, and I had no money. I was slowly dying. I was wetting the bed. I was crying myself to sleep half the time. Every Friday, the first thought that came into my mind after I got paid was, should I go get a gun or should I go get drunk? And that's the truth. But every time I chickened out and I went and got the alcohol instead. When I was 22 years old, my father checked himself into the hospital and I had the house to myself. And for some reason, I had a Friday and a Monday off work. And that was basically a 4-day drinking spree. And I don't know about you, but when I had the day off, I felt relief because I knew that I could drink, and I knew that when I woke up from being passed out that I could reach over and start drinking right again. I didn't have to wait. I didn't have to go through the pain of coming down off the alcohol. I would just keep it going and keep it going, you know. I didn't eat regularly, maybe but once a day if I was lucky. And on the fourth day of that binge, I walked down to the beer store by my house, and I went to buy some more alcohol. And I had been in and out of that store over the past 4 days, and for some reason that day, the people in that store looked at me a little differently, and they refused to serve me that alcohol. They refused to give me it. And it was a 7-Eleven. And I started making a scene at about 1 in the afternoon. You know, you got to imagine, most people are in there getting their hot dogs, their Slurpees, and here I am, drunk, blacked out drunk. And I'm screaming at these people in the 7-Eleven. And I'm not saying nice things. I'm saying real mean things about these people. And I walked outside, and they had called the police. And there was one thing I said I was never going to do, and that was hit another police officer. And the police officer walked over to me. And my defense for the first one was they grabbed me. I mean, what would you do if the police grabbed you? And this time he didn't even grab me, and I just swung and hit him. And the only difference this time is that nobody came and bailed me out. I got to jail. I called a few numbers I had, the first one being my mother, and she said no. And she said these words, and I'll never forget it. She said, "At least I know where you are, so I can sleep at night." And I remember I don't think I had felt dread like that ever. Because at this point, not only was I addicted to alcohol, but I was taking benzos, like Klonopin and Xanax, for my panic attacks and anxiety that was happening when I would come down off the alcohol. I also had a little side habit, a crack habit, that was messing with me pretty hard. That's why I ran out of money, by the way. You can only drink so many half gallons of vodka in a week, so I ran out of money quick. And but so here I am, and I'm in jail, and there's nobody to bail me out. And I sat in jail for 32 days on a $250 bond. And I'll tell you, if I was to try and describe my alcoholism, I could describe it by this situation. Every day that I sat in jail, I reviewed my life. I reviewed my conduct. I reviewed the fact that I was sitting in jail on a $250 bond, and there wasn't a person on this earth who was willing to get me out of jail. And I can tell you that at the end of each day, I came to the same conclusion. If I continue drinking, I'm going to die. If I continue living like this, I'm going to die. When I get out of here, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm going to turn my life around. I'm going to go back to the job I had, and this time I'm actually going to get promoted to a lead tech. I'm going to be able to drive the vehicle. I'm going to get a raise. I'm going to get my own place. I'm going to do all this stuff. And I got out of jail 32 days later. 7 days after I got out, I was sleeping on my grandfather's living room floor, and you can probably guess the only rule for a guy like me in my grandfather's house was to not drink. And I had, go figure, I was on probation for a previous charge, so I had to go see my PO, and she said, "You're going back to jail." She said, "I know you were just in jail, but you violated your probation, and you're going to go back for longer." And I walked out of the probation office, and I walked across the street, and I remember calling my mom from a payphone, and I said, "Hey, Mom." She said, "Hey, are you sober?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been sober 39 days. And she said, "I'm real proud of you, son." And I said, "I'm going to keep it up." But I had no solution. I knew about AA, but I didn't want to go back to AA. There was no way I was going to show my face here to see you guys again, to hear what I thought, the "I told you so's," or "What are you going to do different this time?" You know, and I got off the phone with her, and I looked over across the parking lot, and there was a liquor store. And the thought came into my head, I could really use a couple of drinks to take the edge off. And I thought, well, I'll just go buy a miniature, just around the edges, just a little bit. And I walked over to the liquor store, and I bought a miniature. And I remember buying it. I remember thinking, I don't know if this is a good idea, you know. And there was another liquor store on that street, a couple miles north of there. I walked right into that liquor store and bought a fifth. I left there and I drank that fifth. And I slept in the woods that night. And it was December or January. It was cold. And I remember coming out of the woods at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was freezing. And there was a lady pumping gas at this gas station. I walked over and I was gonna rob her and steal her car because I had nothing. And I remember getting a couple feet from this lady, and I remember looking in her eyes, and she had this fear in her eyes. And the thought crossed my mind of all those nights I sat in jail trying to, concoct a plan of living a different life. And here I was 7 days removed, and I'm drunk. I'm sleeping in the woods, and I'm about to get grand theft auto and a bunch of other felony charges and go back for a lot longer. And I turned at the last second. And I slept in the bathroom of the gas station. They had one of those outdoor bathrooms, and I remember the door was unlocked. I was so happy. And I slept on the floor with the urine and everything, And that morning, the door opened, and an ambulance driver came in, and I thought he was there to help me, and he kicked me, and he said, "Get the F out of the way." He said, "I'm trying to take a piss." And I'll never forget that, because I thought I was getting help. I was like, "Oh, thank God." I dropped a notch lower that day. And I say that describes my alcoholism, because what I didn't realize when I came to AA and every other time that I had tried AA was that my drinking, how much I drank, my DWIs, the time I spent in jail, what I did to my family was not what made me an alcoholic. I had to come to AA and stay around AA to find out what really made me an alcoholic. And what I found out is a two-part statement that's made in the book. And it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. And what that eventually ended up meaning to me was that regardless of the circumstances of my life, regardless of how long I spent in jail, regardless of the amount of jail time I have hanging over my head, regardless if I have cirrhosis of the liver, I talked to a guy about that today, regardless of the circumstances of my life, I will always go back to a drink. And I think that was the hardest thing for me to realize, because I always thought that my plan, this new life that I was going to be living, was going to be the solution. Get a new job, the car, the girl, the house. Don't worry, I figured it out. I know I can't drink. I'm going to be good. The problem is that every time I always forgot that. I would always go back to a drink. And the other part of it is that once I started drinking, I wasn't like the other guys and girls I saw at work. I wasn't like I'm going to have a couple drinks and I think I'm going to call it a night. I always wanted to be like that, kind of, but then I always never really understood it, because a couple of drinks just sounded horrible to me. I always wanted to get lit up, except for some reason when I was not drinking and I was dry without a solution, I would always think I'm just going to have a couple. I never wanted a couple, ever. And so here I am. I'm faced with this dilemma, and I don't really know what the solution is. I can't stop drinking. My grandfather lets me back in. I'm sleeping on his floor. And the end of my drinking wasn't even the worst time of my drinking. My drinking at that point consisted of waiting until everybody went to sleep. My grandfather was a vodka drinker, go figure. And he would keep 6 half-gallons in the kitchen. And so I would just wait till about 1 or 2 in the morning. I'd sneak in the kitchen. I'd fill myself up a glass of vodka, and I would drink it in the dark by myself. There was nothing there except me wanting relief. I had nothing. The only relief I got was from this vodka. I had no friends. I was working this job, and I was going nowhere. And a funny thing happened. I ran into a guy in the mall one day. I was on lunch with a guy I worked with, and I ran into this guy who I had brought to AA. I don't know if anybody's ever done this before, but I'd been in and out of AA, but I'd be around people who were messed up, and they'd be like, man, I just got in trouble with the law, or my family's kicking me out, and I would promote, I'd be like, you should go to AA. I know a great place for you, And here I am dying, And I'm referring other people there. They're like, you sure it works? I'm like, yeah, it's going to work for you. It's going to work, but for me, it wasn't going to work, So I had referred all these people to AA, so I ended up running into this guy who I had referred to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was 3 years sober. And he had a suit on, and he had a girl on his arm. He had all the stuff I wanted, right? And he had a suit on, a girl on his arm, and I ran into him one day in the mall. And he was like, hey, John. I was like, hey. And I was like, you look great, man. He's like, yeah. He's like, things are good. And he's like, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm good. And he was like, and you know what? He said something that probably saved my life. He said, you look like you're dying. And I was offended at first. I was like, who says that to somebody they haven't seen in 3 years, And but he was a member of AA, and he told me the truth. And he asked me a question that day that I will forever be grateful for him. And he said, do you want to go to a meeting tonight? I hadn't been to a meeting in years. I was drinking myself to death. I had no friends. I had nobody who was asking me to go anywhere. And this guy asked me if I wanted to go to a meeting that night. And for some reason, I said yes. And he picked me up, him and a couple of other guys, and we had some dinner before the meeting. And we went to the meeting, and I've been sober since that day. And I used to think that there was something magical I could say to people here. I used to think there was like some way that I could describe why I'm sober now, why that was, the last day of me taking a drink. And I know today that the truth is that the reason that Alcoholics Anonymous has worked for me is because I ran out of ideas that day. I had nothing left. And he asked me if I wanted to go to a meeting, and I said yeah. And I met a bunch of guys that night. I got a sponsor. And that sponsor did what my sponsors in the past had tried to do, tried to get me to go through the steps. And for some reason I was willing. I had no other ideas. And we started reading through the book, and we started going through the steps. And I very quickly did something I had not done in all the years of going to AA, which was write a 4th step. We had gotten through the first 3 steps, and I was reading him a 5th step with under a month sober. And I remember it because that was one of the steps that I was terrified of. And the reason I was terrified of it was because I knew that what they meant was I was going to have to tell him everything. And I had done some cruddy stuff in my drinking. I had done some stuff I was ashamed of. I had done stuff I was embarrassed of. I had some stuff go on when I was younger, before I even started drinking, that I was really embarrassed of. Stuff that I was never... The thought of even telling somebody, it never even crossed my mind. Like, maybe I should tell somebody about this horrible stuff. The truth was, like, you don't ever tell anybody that kind of stuff. Why would you ever tell somebody this personal stuff about you? A, they're going to look at you like there's something wrong with you. And B, they're probably going to use it to hurt you. And so I was left with another decision at that point. Was I going to be honest? And I don't actually tell this story very much, but the truth is I wasn't honest. I left something off that 5th step. And a couple weeks later, I was ready to take a drink. I remember getting home from the meeting one night. At that point, I was going to meetings every day. I had started getting active in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsor suggested that I get a home group, that I get service positions. And I started to, without me even really knowing it, surround everything in my life around Alcoholics Anonymous. A couple weeks after I do this 5th step, I get home, and I'm going to take a drink. I'm still living with my grandfather. He still has 6 gallons of vodka in the house, and I know where it is. And for some reason, I guess I had talked to a guy I knew at the meeting that night and told him I wasn't feeling too good. And he called me. And this guy, who had been sober probably 4 or 5 years at this point, said, hey, I just wanted to check up on you. I know you said you were struggling. And I told him, I think I'm not going to make it, man. And he said, what's going on? And I said, I lied. I lied on my 4th step, and I lied on my 5th step to my sponsor. And I said, and I'm afraid. I'm afraid that if I tell him that he's going to judge me and that he's going to think there's something really wrong with me. And this guy without saying anything else, just started telling me a story about himself. And it was the exact same thing, almost, as what I needed to tell my sponsor. I wasn't his sponsor. I wasn't one of his good friends. I wasn't his family. I was a guy he had met in AA and didn't even know that well. And he told me this story. And literally, my shoulders dropped, and I told him. And he said, now tell your sponsor. And I was able to call my sponsor that night, and I was able to tell him. You know? So I wasn't honest on my first, fourth, and fifth step. And again, it has helped me and reminded me that the worst things that have happened to me have been some of the most valuable things I have to help somebody else. You know, and I've been able to share that story with other alcoholics. I've been able to share some of the worst things about me to other members of AA, other new men in the program. I have had countless guys read me their entire fifth step and stop and say, that's it. And then I'll tell them a story. And they'll say, well, actually, I do have something too. You know, and I remember when I told my sponsor, he said, now you're going to be able to use that to help somebody else. And every time you tell it to somebody else, it's going to get a little bit easier for you. And you'll be able to let it go. And I didn't believe him. I was like, I'm never telling anybody about that, you know. And when you have somebody with you and they're giving you everything they have and they've opened up to you and you're able to tell them stuff about yourself, there's nothing like it, you know. And I wait, you know, after I did my fifth step, my sponsor and I, we reviewed the sixth and seventh step, and he wanted me to start writing my eighth step. And I wrote my eighth step, and I like to talk about this too. I wrote this eighth step, and I didn't do much with it. I really didn't. You know, I wrote it when I probably had like 6 months sober, 6 to 8 months sober. I didn't really do too much with it. You know, I was afraid to go back and make some of these amends that I had to make. And I definitely was not willing to change my lifestyle to fit into paying back people I owed money to. My idea was like, one day I'm going to make more money, and at that time I'll start paying back these amends. But something started to happen. I would make like an extra $1 an hour. By the way, I was a Starbucks barista at this point, so I wasn't rich. And but I would get promoted to like a shift manager, you know, and I'd get an extra $1 or $2 an hour, but I'd spend it. You know, and then I would say, well, I mean, you know, I don't make enough money. You know, and when I had about a year sober, my sponsor gave me a couple suggestions. He said, why don't you start taking a meeting back into the detox that you were a patient at 3 times. He took a meeting there every week. So he was Hispanic. And he said, why don't you start taking a meeting in there? They don't have a regular AA meeting. He took a Spanish meeting into some of the Spanish guys. And he was there every week, you know, and I said, I don't know, man. I said, you know, I got my Wednesday night commitment already, and I like it. You know, me and the guys, we set up the meeting, and we play basketball before the meeting. And he said, well, I think you should take this commitment. And I'll tell you that between that and the other suggestion he gave me when I had a year sober, probably 2 of the best things I ever listened to. And I started taking that meeting into this detox. And I can tell you that for the past almost 10 years, I've taken a meeting in there every Wednesday night. And I have so many friends around me in the program that I met there that it changed my life. And the second one, he said, was why don't you start having dinner with your father every Wednesday night before you go to your detox? And I thought that was another bad idea, mainly because I didn't really like being around my father. You know, my father was the type of guy who he'd want to give me advice. He'd want to tell me he wanted to tell me he loved me. He would want to tell me, like, don't worry, you're going to get it, son. You're going to turn it around, or I'm proud of you for little things. You know, I hated myself on the inside. I really hated myself. And I know this isn't everybody's experience. And I want to give a little disclaimer that family relationships, you know, I don't know. I don't think everybody gets their family back. Or I don't think everybody has these relationships with their father or whatever. But I can tell you that regardless of if it was my father, my mother, I have new relationships today. And I have them because of AA. You may not have one with your father. You may not have had it with your mother. But I can tell you that I have so many relationships today because of AA. friends, family. And it's all because of AA. And I started having dinner with this man every Wednesday night. And it started out with me going over to his house, taking a nap on his couch while he cooked me dinner, eat the food, and then leave and say, "Bye, Dad. Thanks. I'll see you next week." And over the years, it started to transform. I would go to my sponsor. I remember I said, "Hey, sponsor, I kind of feel a little bit bad. When I go over to my dad's house, I sleep half the time I'm there." And he was like, "What?" I was like, "What are you doing?" You know? And so I stopped taking naps. And I said, "Sponsor, I kind of feel bad. My dad always pays and cooks dinner." He's like, "Well, why don't you start seeing if you can bring something and helping out?" And so I started bringing stuff and helping. And over the years, my relationship with my father grew to the point where I'd see him on Wednesday nights, and for some reason, I'd want to call him on Saturdays, and then I started calling him on Mondays and Saturdays, and then I started calling him on Fridays and Saturdays and Mondays. And then when anything good happened in my life, the first person I thought of talking to was my father. This guy I didn't want anything to do with. The last thing I was ever going to do was tell him anything about my life. And anything good that happened, I would call him. And he became one of my best friends because of AA. And there came a time where I realized that the way I was spending my money, I was never going to make enough money to pay back these people. And so I decided that instead of making more money, I was going to have to change what I spent my money on and create money to pay back people. And the first person I needed to pay back was my father. And I went to him and I said, "Dad, I owe you like $20,000 it was about." And he looked at me and he actually got upset. He said, "Son, for your father's heart, don't ever bring that money up to me ever again." And that was the only time he ever got upset at me, when I was sober. And I said, "Okay." And I saved the money anyway. I saved it anyway. I put it in an account because my father was sick. My father had heart problems. And I thought that maybe one day he might need it. He didn't have a job. He didn't have any money, really. And I know this isn't, I don't know what you're going to take this as, but my father passed away about 3 years ago. And when he passed away, I was pretty much in charge of paying for his funeral. And the amount of money that I had to pay for his funeral was the exact amount of money that I had saved over the years for him. And I don't know what that is. I don't know why that is, And shortly after my father died, my mom came down with stage 4 brain cancer, and which was hard. But because of AA, I was able to show up for her. She ended up passing away about 4 weeks ago. And when she passed away, she was living with me. Because of AA, I was able to have a job. Because of AA, I was able to have a home for her to live in. Because of AA, I was willing to have her in my home. And she got to spend the last 6 months of her life living with me and living with my brother. And if it wasn't for AA, I wouldn't have had that. I wouldn't have had any of it. And I can tell you that when I got to AA, I wouldn't have wanted that. What I wanted when I got to AA was what I saw on my friend Jimmy. A suit, a girl on my arm, a car. I would have wanted all that stuff. If people said, "You'll never believe what you're going to get after you get sober," I would have been like, "What?" They would have been like, "Relationships with your family." I would have been like, "Is there another program?" That was not interesting to me. That meant nothing to me. They would have said, "Don't worry, you're going to have friends. You're going to watch a fellowship grow up about you. You're going to see other men in this program. You're going to see the lights come on in their eyes. You're going to see them have relationships with their family. You're going to see them go to dinner with their dads. You're going to see them become the people in their family who are trusted, the people who their families look up to, the people who get to help out and take care of their families. You get to talk to guys like the guy I talked to today who's babysitting his baby sisters and his brother who's 2 years old. This guy wasn't even allowed in his family's house 9 months ago. And that's the kind of stuff that I've gotten in AA that I never even thought I wanted. I never even knew it. And the biggest thing I try to do today is to give this away to other people. I have been given a lot in AA. I've been given a lot, not just spiritually, but I've been given a lot. I have a lot of stuff today too. Like I said, I have a house, I have a car, I've got a great job, I've got all that stuff. And I can tell you that even today, that stuff, if I'm not careful, can become very important to me. And I can hold on to it, and I can start pushing things to the side to try and keep it. And when I do that, I'm sure to take a drink again if I stay on that path. And so today, I have to remember to continue to give this back to people. I have to remember that when Heidi asked me to drive down here, that I say yes. Yes, you know. I have to remember to give my time to other men in this program, because I can't see a lot of it in myself, but I can see it in the eyes and in the lives of other people in AA today. I'm very grateful to be here. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new, I hope you stay here. I hope you do, and I hope you give this thing a chance, because like I said, when I got here, I would have never wanted what I have today. But because I stayed and I followed the suggestions and I did the steps, I have an amazing life because of AA today. So thank you all for listening.